Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in.
Okay, happy Thursday everybody. We begin today's episode with moving through the important economic updates from the last 24 hours. Today's episode will be very economics, finance and business heavy. And first up, there is news of yet more support for the economy, this time for the private sector. With so much poor economic data recently, it seems that policymakers wish to continue pushing incremental support measures. So far, however, the results of these efforts have been quite underwhelming. The People's Bank of China convened a meeting with the National Financial Supervision and Administration Bureau and the Shanghai and Shenzhen stock exchanges to discuss financial support for the development of private enterprises. According to Chinese financial media outlet Yicai, the first draft of the policy document with the support measures is ready and will be released in the near future. Proposed measures include, quote, hiking investment in financial resource factors, giving full play to the role of multi-level capital markets, facilitating cross-border financing and strengthening policy incentives. End quote. It's difficult to know what exactly these are referring to. We wait for the details once the document is published. Next up, we need to talk about Country Garden, the potential Evergrande 2.0. The massive private developer is not looking good, with commentators fearing this could be the next major domino to fall in the ongoing housing crisis, which is increasingly spreading to other sectors, most concerningly the financial sector. Yesterday, Wednesday, Country Garden Holdings Co. announced in a filing a record $6.7 billion in losses for the first 6 months of 2023, and also warned that it, quote, might not be able to meet debt obligations, which may result in default. End quote. Country Garden said it had liabilities of about 1.36 trillion RMB as of the end of the first half of 2023, and it also said it would, quote, consider adopting various debt arrangement measures to resolve, end quote, what it described as, quote, phased liquidity pressure, end quote. We remember that concerns over Country Garden's finances grew this month when it missed coupon payments on international bonds. On Tuesday of this week, the developer asked Chinese creditors for a 40-day grace period on a renminbi bond maturing next week. In the filing from yesterday, the developer cited, quote, material uncertainties, end quote, that may cast, quote, significant doubt on the group's ability to continue as a going concern, end quote. Country Garden said that it had failed to recognize the risks of its heavy reliance on lower-tier property markets, and then, in a rather candid statement, admitted, quote, the market's downtrend caught the company completely off guard, end quote. This is quite an incredible statement. Country Garden was China's largest developer by sales for 6 straight years. Yet it was caught off guard completely, to use its own words. This tells us a lot about attitudes within the industry during the boom years. Chinese developers face $38 billion in bond payments over the next 4 months, and yet almost universally across the board, developers have seen sales plunge this year. Analysts are not optimistic. Quote, developer defaults will certainly continue as almost all private developers face cash flow pressure that isn't going away anytime soon. Any policy support that does come will take time to feed through to cash flow, home sales, and new construction starts. End quote. In yesterday's video, we covered the news that China will likely see mortgage rate reductions, which would impact most of the nation's 38.6 trillion yuan worth of outstanding mortgages. It is hoped by some that such a move should support household purchasing power, thus helping with demand in the economy, despite the pressure it puts on banks' profitability. I just wanted to supplement this coverage with an observation made today. quote, "While a reduction in mortgage payments certainly increases the purchasing power of those with mortgages, if the mortgage rate cuts are not matched by deposit rate reductions, the benefits to those with mortgages will be matched by reductions in bank profitability, and in a banking system very worried about a surge in non-performing loans, and that probably needs to be recapitalized, a reduction in bank profitability may put other forms of downward pressure on the economy. If, on the other hand, the mortgage rate cuts are matched by deposit rate reductions, the net effect will be a transfer of income from households without mortgage payments to households with mortgage payments. This might reduce, rather than raise, net household purchases. My point is not that mortgage rate cuts are bad policy, but only that it is foolish to assume that the incremental effects are the same as the systemic effects. I suspect this is why regulators seem so reluctant to implement what many analysts think are obvious measures." End quote. Next up, we have more economic news, and then we move to UK-China relations. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to hit that like button. Liking, sharing, and subscribing are big helps for the channel, and for anyone who can go the extra mile and help keep the channel financially sustainable, open and free for all 6 days a week. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. As always, thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up for the economy, Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei has caused a buzz this week with the quiet release of its Mate 60 Pro phone, which appeared this week for sale on online malls. It is being viewed by some as Huawei's revival after years of wrestling with US restrictions on circuitry and software. Interestingly, despite these tight sanctions from the US, the phone does appear to have achieved 5G capabilities. The model runs on Huawei's latest Harmony OS 4.0 mobile operating system and has advanced functions including satellite calling, artificial intelligence-powered large language model applications, and wireless fast charging, according to the company website. Curiously, no information about the chip used in the device is available on the same company website. The Huawei phone release excited the markets. US financial media outlet Bloomberg reports that on Wednesday, shares in more than a dozen Chinese chip designers, gear makers, and Huawei suppliers surged between 8 and 20%. The outlet explains that the rally grew out of the hopes that Huawei has somehow managed to design, manufacture, and deploy a 5G chip capable of matching some of the best America has to offer, despite a lack of access to advanced chip making at players including Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Co. It remains to be seen whether these hopes are well-founded or not. Some commentators have pointed out that the release of this new phone was nicely timed to coincide with US Commerce Secretary Raimondo's official visit to Beijing this week. Next up, and finally for today's episode, we touch on UK-China relations. Yesterday, the UK's Foreign Secretary made a one-day visit to China, the highest-ranking UK official to visit China since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Meeting with his counterpart, China's Wang Yi made fairly boilerplate comments about cooperation. According to the official Chinese readout, the two sides also exchanged views on Ukraine and North Korea. The UK government made it clear before the trip that a key focus of the Foreign Secretary's visit would be trade and investment, but that, quote, this would not be at the expense of national security, end quote. Indeed, according to the British readout of the Wang Yi meeting, the Foreign Secretary communicated the UK's position on, quote, China's malign cyber activity, end quote, and had, quote, detailed discussions on Hong Kong, stressing the damage caused by the Beijing-imposed national security law to rights and freedoms and consequently to China's international reputation, end quote. The trip is also a general attempt to mend some of the communication bridges left to wear out during the long COVID years of isolation. Quote, "This is about engaging directly with the Chinese government, building lines of communication, addressing the issues where we have disagreements, but also looking at opportunities to work together on some of the major issues affecting both our countries and the world, whether that be climate change, the resolution of the war in Ukraine, or indeed the opportunity to build our economies." End quote. In a well-timed exclusive, just before the trip, UK-based Financial Times broke a story claiming that Goldman Sachs had used a $2.5 billion private equity fund set up with Chinese state money to buy a series of US and UK companies, quote, "including one with a cybersecurity business that provides services to the British government." End quote. The Foreign Secretary's China trip also comes as his own government is under mounting pressure from lawmakers back home to get more tough on the PRC. Indeed, as the trip was underway in the PRC, the UK House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee issued a report on the government's Indo-Pacific strategy that said, quote, "Taiwan is already an independent country under the name Republic of China." End quote. A move that will likely enrage Beijing. This is the first time a UK parliamentary body has asserted that Taiwan is an independent country in an official document. The committee report expresses, quote, "Taiwan possesses all the qualifications for statehood, including a permanent population, a defined territory, government, and the capacity to enter into relations with other states. It is only lacking greater international recognition." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Have a great Thursday, everybody, and I will see you all tomorrow.